Greetings, fellow aliens. So, I said I was going to talk about this article. I tweeted that I was going to, rather. Um, so, I guess I better do that. So, today we're talking about this article called Programming is Hard by Doran Lazar, which I found via the News YC 250 Twitter feed. Basically, it shows every article that comes up that gets more than 250 points on Hacker News. So convenient way of keeping up with some programming topics that have a lot of buzz. Anyway, so why did I want to talk about this article? Because it's much easier to go through someone else's content than make your own, perhaps. But I am working on some beginner level, like a sort of introduction to programming concepts, sort of lesson that I'll probably stream here on Twitch and then upload onto YouTube within the next few days, give or take. So let's go through this article and I will let you know my thoughts. Programming is hard. Most beginners in programming eventually end up with the same ingratiating message: programming is easy, everyone can do it, with some threatening message that people doing the gatekeeping should stop doing that. I'm here to tell you that that is not true. Programming is hard. Programming is not for everyone. And for the time being, everyone might be able to do it, but most definitely most should not. Now, hold on there a second. Most should not? Well, what does that mean? Maybe not everyone should pursue a career as a software engineer, because there are a lot of careers out there. Just like not everyone should be, I don't know, a doctor, a bus driver. But I kind of bristle at this concept that not everyone can do it. Like, maybe the way that the field is structured right now, the field, like it's a harder learning curve for people who learn in a certain way versus other ways. But maybe the right teachers just don't exist at that in that point in time. Okay, so back to the article. Like most of the empty, shallow, positive messages coming with an automatic defense against refute, in this case talking about this gatekeeping thing that simply doesn't happen. Well, until now, I'm the gatekeeper now. Okay, reference to that movie I haven't seen. Is it any good? What was it? Captain Phillips? Tom Hanks? I should watch that. So I'm gatekeeping things that simply doesn't happen. I mean, this is probably not the first article of this type. I think that maybe he has a point that having an automatic defense against refute is like, what is it? A logical fallacy? A rhetorical fallacy? You can, you can call anything you don't like gatekeeping, and it's hard to defend against that, I suppose. Like any attempt to have standards in a field. Like you don't want just anyone off the street to be, doing surgery on you, right? I should link to this in the chat, so in case anyone wants to, I don't know, peruse this on their own time. Talking about this article. Programming is hard. All right. Why is my computer dinging at me? I don't know. Computers are hard in that sense, because you don't know why they're dinging at you. Programming is accessible, and I like this framing of it. He says, when silly people say that programming is easy, everyone can do it, it's really actually about how accessible the programming field is. If you have the basic utility of access to internet resolved, it's quite easy to access resources to learn things. No other science is accessible as computer science. Is that true? I don't know. And most of its proceeds, what about math? Like, you can count things. Like, you don't even need a computer to count things, right? But I guess that's, because someone taught you to count things who's getting paid probably not well enough to teach you that. Moving on. And most of its proceeds happen out in the open. So we've got open source, we've got people blogging about it, people twitching about it, right? Computer science thrives on the internet, and although there are corners that do actual gatekeeping, what are these corners? I don't know. Maybe like university programs, like maybe forums that are elitist. Most of content is freely accessible and thrives on this accessibility. You can download compilers, editors, IDEs, even. You can access documentation, discuss with people about issues, and so on. It's a big community, welcoming and open in ways that no other science ever was in the history of mankind. Like, is that true? Like, that's a pretty broad statement. I would like some people, if anyone watches this ever, that if you know more about history, like, was that the case? Were there other sciences that were more welcoming and open than computer science? I mean, there's like two aspects to that, like how open and welcoming actually is computer science and software engineering and programming. Three things which are kind of synonymous, but there's distinction between them. How actually accessible are those, and how accessible have things been in the past? Like, I know, like, in a lot of places there was obviously, like, misogyny preventing women from joining a particular field or advancing within it or getting the credit. Did I not? Excuse me, I misspelled programming here in the chat. And I forgot to actually link to the... Okay, it's... Oh, because it's not actually pasting or something? Copy, paste. Oh, okay. It's because I've got my Mac muscle memory here. Sorry about that. Using Alt instead of Control because I thought it was Command. Okay. Moving back to the article. Yeah, so is it the most accessible in the history of mankind? And like there are barriers in the field. Like people, like for one thing, the people you see as programmers portrayed in media and whatnot are more often white, male. Yeah, those things especially. Media, as well as like what you're going to see if you read like tech news. Okay, moving on. And indeed, you don't need to know a lot. There are things that can be done in the literal first 30 minutes of your contact with the programming field. See my upcoming Twitch stream about Intro to Programming Concepts. Programming is accessible in ways that no other science is. But just because one can access something easily, that doesn't make it easy. That doesn't make it easy. Just because I can mix 3 things in an omelet doesn't make me a top chef. True. I can cook a few things, but I never said that cooking is easy. Cooking is hard work, patience to details, and requires a lot of knowledge and experience. So, like, I don't disagree that there is a difference between making an omelet and being a top chef. Like, there are levels to cooking, and there's a difference between cooking for yourself and cooking professionally. But also, cooking is something that a lot of people, like for a large, like now you can just buy, frozen meals and pop them in the microwave, right? But for a large part of human history, cooking was something that at least one person in every household has to be able to do, right? Like there can be like accessible parts of a field that are, accessible to everyone, like, and not just easy to learn, but are like part of our everyday experience. And I think that there's an argument to be made that programming has a place in that sense. Like, people ought to be able to sort of hack their world, in a sense, like sort of automating their, like, maybe the automatic or ugh, automating things that they have to do that are repetitive, boring. And I think there's a place for programming, even non-professional programmers, to have more programmatic access to like services they use. Like APIs, application program interfaces. Typically these are things that, as a programmer, you would use to talk to a service, as opposed to the user interface that, like, the programmer would use that to connect one program to another, to have their program, say, I don't know, every 5 minutes downloading stuff from a web service or uploading something to that web service or whatever. Like, those kind of things, like, I think those can be, like, readily accessible, like more accessible than they are now. Yeah. So, continuing with this, programming is a peculiar combination of creativity. Or wait, did I skip a bit? Cooking is hard work, patience to details, and requires a lot of knowledge and experience. So yeah, cooking as a profession, um, especially as becoming well respected in that profession, and producing high quality work in a profession and in any profession, um, requires hard work, patience to details, attention to details, maybe patience and attention to details, and yeah, requires a lot of knowledge and experience. But there are aspects to a lot of professions that I think people can generally benefit, like lay people, meaning people not in that profession, can benefit from knowing. Like everybody learns math in grade school. Um, like our our society is built on the assumption that you can do like basic arithmetic. I mean, at some point that was high tech. That was the philosophers probably were like the or what did they call them? I guess philosophers in like ancient Greece. They're like all of the learned people were called philosophers in that like time period and place. But now it is something that you actually have to learn, like but beyond beyond. Well, I mean, I guess you even have to learn the individual like one digit numbers, but math is something that everyone learns to some extent in their schooling, and I think that there should be an amount of programming that you learn in starting in grade school, because our world increasingly depends on computers, and being able to interact with them and have some idea of what is going on inside these computers that are to some extent controlling our lives, or being used to control our lives, or at least uh, influence us, and manage all our assets and the services that we interact with. All of these depend on programming, and I don't think it's like a bad idea for people in general, like as part of their well-rounded education, um, to like even primary level education, to learn a bit about how this stuff works. Okay, so programming is a bleh. Click go live on OBS to start streaming, and you'll instantly forget how to talk. Okay, programming is a peculiar combination of creativity and hard science, and nobody ever said that creativity is easy. Some things come easy to some people, some things don't. Okay, I'll grant you that. But also, like, you can do creative things for fun, even if you're not like the world's biggest expert at it. Like, and programming can be that for some people. It can be a hobby. Just like drawing can be a hobby, even if you're not a professional artist. Or cooking. Some programming things are easy. Now, there's no doubt about it. There are some things that are easy, There are things you can do at the end of a day. You might have a skeleton of a blog application, for example. Okay, common tutorial is to build a blog. One can make, with guidance, a professional-looking web page in the first hours of learning HTML. Like, I I would like that guidance because I'm not very good at design, visual design. It's easy to ask someone and find a solution on Stack Overflow. One can easily copy and paste the solution into their web pages. True. Learning to fix all the errors that you get when you try to integrate the Stack Overflow code with your own code can that takes some skill and some work. There's a ton of tutorials for beginners, even for complete beginners, some of them created by beginners. Programming is nothing if not a welcoming place for beginners. Beginners walk a very fertile ground. Okay, I agree with that. What is easy, however, is different from person to person. Things that I find incredibly difficult, others find incredibly easy. Things that I find easy, others are overwhelmed by. Okay, so as I just mentioned, like front-end design is one thing that I'm not particularly adept at the moment. Yeah, just making the web page pretty and professional looking. I was gonna say something about that. I don't know. There's no consensus of what is easy to whom, but there are, for everyone, easy things depending on the learning path they followed, however, right? And yeah, the fact that there are lots of different learning paths into programming, that's a good thing, in my opinion. Like some people, okay, showing my age a little bit here. I, first got interested in programming because my dad had a Commodore 64, which is an early personal computer before the PC, quote unquote. And basically, when you use those, you've got a it starts with a command line, and it's very close to you're probably, if you're using that kind of computer back in those days, you're probably typing in code from a magazine, and so computers at that point were hobbyist things, and you didn't necessarily have to be a programmer, but yeah, so that's one way in, is to be exposed to it by your parents, by educators. And there's also being finding stuff about it on the web, finding tutorials, YouTube videos, Twitch streams. And yeah, it's good that not every way of learning or subfield of programming might come easy to everyone. So it's good that there's diversity in the paths in. Okay, next section. Most programming things are hard. Here's the truth. If one starts doing anything more complex than a simple web page or a simple demo program, things become difficult. And the more pieces are put together, the more complex and overwhelming the task becomes. And that's what every quote-unquote programming is easy bullshitter doesn't say. I don't know, do they not say this? I don't feel like this is this is a secret that things become hard once you get a lot of moving pieces. Feel free to put your opinion on this in the chat if you're watching and feel like it. Solving programming puzzles are hard, especially when they're not meant to be puzzles. Yeah. So, like, it's not a secret that when programs become long, or they become messy, or a lot of people are working on them, or you leave your own code for 6 months and come back as the standard trope. 6 months later, your own code is someone else's code. So yeah, I don't think it's like I I don't think anybody's like hiding that fact that things become difficult as you develop, and as things become, like, as you build more complex things, or work on more complex code bases. Okay, going on. In fact, if treated properly, most programming things are hard, even things that might seem simple. That is because you have complex pieces that you have to put together and make them work. Things that might seem simple. Okay, and the hardest part is when one has to write the complex pieces from scratch. No argument there. It's easy to use things that people have already made than to make your own things. Things only seem easy, well, unless they're not very well designed. Sometimes it is easier to write something from scratch than get a crappy library working that doesn't do a whole lot of things, but also has more bugs than features. At a place I worked, we had this we had like a high availability configuration for one of our programs where they would like there were two nodes running on two different servers, and they would talk to each other so that they wouldn't both end up active at the same time, and inserting things in the database. Like they were both getting a feed of some data, and the ideas was is if one goes down, the then the other one would take over. And like whatever library we were using for this, I don't know, it just was not working well. And like looking at the documentation, like it just like wasn't working. And so I built something from scratch that it wasn't very complicated. Just and all it basically had to tell was like that both nodes were available. Like they had to check that each other was available, and one of them had to decide to be the active node. And so there were some messaging back and forth, but like something relatively simple, and simple is relative to your level of experience with a particular, like if you haven't done any network programming, something like that might be complex. But like sometimes rewriting something can be simpler. I think that might be getting off topic. Like it's not really what the author is like focusing on. Did I just screw up my windows? Oh, come on. What is... Twitching is hard. Hold on, hold on. What? Okay. Okay. Maybe? No? This is... Bear with me, folks. Properties. Capture. No? That's not what I wanted. Window capture. Okay. That's what I want. Okay, now it's giving me. Sorry about this. We'll let it out in post. Okay, I think we're back in business. Just wanted to put the chat over to the left because it's farther away from where I am, and the article closer. So anyway, sorry about that. Most programming things are hard. In fact, if treated properly. Okay, that is because you have complex pieces you have to put together and make them work, and the hardest part is when one has to write the complex pieces from scratch. And that's where I got off on my tangent. Things only seem easy because you have people with 5, 10, 20 years of experience, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Different things are, easier or harder depending on your level of experience with them. That are easy to them because they did them many times before, because they made all the possible mistakes or thought about them and made sure they don't fall in those traps. And I wonder if this is like what the source of some of the programming is easy is people who are really have either been steeped in it or have a lot of experience with it. Like it's hard to see what it's like when you don't have that experience. But he's also talking about beginners, teaching beginners, and well, I don't know, setting themselves up as experts. Maybe the problem, nothing wrong with beginners helping other beginners. If you're setting yourself up as an expert when you're not an expert, of course, then the question is, what is an expert? And that's something we don't really have real standards of what is an expert in the software engineering field or in web development in general. I mean, in computer science as a science, there's there are actual degrees and that kind of thing. But in that case, you're kind of in an academic world. But there is no programmer that hasn't spent a full day on a bug that was fixed by something silly, like adding a semicolon character or changing less than to less than or equal to. Nobody tells you as a beginner about those times when the world is unfair and you hit a library bug or a limiting hardware bug. Yep. Like the time finding the source of the bug, usually the answer to a bug is very simple, but it's understanding the behavior of the bug and the code where it is occurring enough to find the actual source of the bug that is hard. Which makes, if someone's asking you how long is this going to take to fix, that can be annoying because you don't know what you don't know. That being said, the author goes on, imposture and the positivity racket. How many times have you heard about the imposter syndrome? If you're hearing about the programming is easy speech, you probably heard about it a lot of times from the very same people. The imposter syndrome is theoretically when one feels not competent enough to do the job they are being paid for, and their success is undeserved, but you hear about it when people actually hit those seemingly unproductive bottlenecks, when they have to fix or polish their own work, or they cannot find a fast answer on Stack Overflow. Mostly I hear about imposters in the programming field when the balloon pops, when they can no longer keep up with the untenable standards they created for themselves, when they cannot rush at the speed they're used to. I have my own beef with the imposter syndrome. but there's another time for that. Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome, I think, is a real thing. It's like people. I've seen people who are very eminent in their fields talking about like their experience with it. I think to some extent it's like um, because of like bias in the field. Like women in general have to or are expected to prove themselves to a greater extent um, in a lot of cases. Um, and so like that can be a source of what might be considered imposter syndrome. But it might, I don't know, maybe that should be called its own thing, like I don't know, misogyny in tech. Positivity, the it's easy racket, doesn't tell you a thing about the moments when things are incredibly hard, when diligent work and steady effort is required, when there are no answers that others can give you, and it's all between you and other people's code, or worse, your code. It's those moments where you have to rethink the entire architectures because some things just will not hold the test of water. Okay. And like I don't I don't necessarily think that the people telling you like that it's easy to get started with programming, like is anyone actually hiding the fact that things get more difficult as you go on and get better at things and take on more difficult challenges and professional challenges. um, yeah, I don't necessarily see it. I mean, okay, he's getting to, or they're getting to, um, the beginners teaching beginners thing. Okay, I said that the programming field is a fertile ground for beginners, and it is. But what's fertile for grain is fertile for weeds too, even more so. And we need to talk about these people taking advantage of the fertile ground. And where there's plenty of beginners, there's plenty of people taking advantage of them. There are many ways this happens. Some of them are not even aware that they do it. They're just instinctive hustlers that oversell their own skills. Usually you see them. 2 years of experience in software development, writing books and giving advice, sometimes at a hefty price. Okay, well, 2 years, I mean, if you're not hiding your level of experience, like I don't necessarily see the problem with it. Someone in the field for 2 years knows things that someone who's just entering the field or who wants to enter the field like hasn't had experience with. Like you still have things to teach someone who's just entering the field if you've been in it for a little while. And not all experience is necessarily equal. Like if you're doing the same thing over and over, like the same kinds of projects, maybe you're not learning as much as someone who's taking on a lot of different projects and who maybe has, I don't know, better mentoring or um, you know, not to mention that like years of experience like isn't necessarily counting things that that someone's doing before they enter the field. Like someone can just be entering the field who's or someone could have been in the field for a couple years, and someone else could have been in the field for the same amount of time and also have, I don't know, worked on a lot of open source projects on a volunteer basis, and that's not necessarily going to count against their, or they could have been shown things by their parents, grown up with computers, and that's not necessarily going to show in their quote unquote years of experience. So yeah, just saying that I guess it's not necessarily as simple as the author is making it out to be. And one doesn't need to be a complete liar to present a deceitful image of the field. All you need to do is play with people's sentiments. For example, you tell them something wrong that people want to hear. You have to find the keywords that will flatter the most your audience. Programming is one of them because programming is quite a fuzzy thing. But the label of programmer is one quite sought for, just like the label senior is sought for by people who want to be seniors in their early 20s. So you need to find the label that flatters the audience and apply it in an unmistakable way to your audience, and that's how you end up with programming is easy or not, or HTML is a programming language. It's not. He says, they say, or programming is all about mastering Google/Stack Overflow searching. Okay, so yeah, at what point do you get to call yourself a programmer? And there's no like we don't have a certification for you are now a programmer in this field. And in my opinion, if you can write programs for any given problem, given like the requirements of that program, like given that you have enough domain knowledge, like if you're writing, I don't know, tax software, you have to know things about taxes to write tax software. But if you like have that background knowledge, what makes you a programmer is being able to write a program to do things that you want it to do, or that it's required to do by whoever's asking you to write it. Like, so this is something that I'm probably going to touch on in the next few days. Is like how to write programs. And I was exposed to programming for a long time before I actually knew how to write programs. Like I learned things about if statements and loops, and I don't think I really learned about functions until I got to college, actually. I went, majored in computer science, and I think that's where I learned about things like subroutines, functions, whatever your language calls them. Usually it's functions these days, or methods. Like, I guess QBasic, okay, this is kind of getting off track. I guess QBasic had GoSub, but I didn't really understand what that was all about. But it's, but yeah, it was functions essentially. Right. So I was like, I learned these things that to be able to maybe look at a program and kind of understand how it was working, but not how to write programs myself. And so I think what made me a programmer was learning some design techniques. And by design, I don't mean like visually designing like how a web page should look, for example, or other kind of things should look. I mean, like, well, in programming it's called design, but it's like maybe planning would be a better word for it, and like problem solving. So like in programming, design means, unless you're talking about like web design or visual design, design means planning and problem solving. And yeah, I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next few days. I was thinking of doing the like intro to programming concepts stream. I'm really digressing here right now. Sorry, folks. Yeah, so in the next couple of days, like after I talk about some intro to programming concepts, because it's sort of the groundwork, I'm going to talk about like that information that, in my opinion, made me a programmer. Like how to take a problem and create, plan out the program and solve the problem, like decompose the problem and solve it. So next few days, probably watch this space, or I'll probably tweet about it, Cathodion on Twitter. Back to the article. So HTML, I have no opinion on whether HTML is a programming language, but mastering, Stack Overflow, searching, like that's a big part of it. Okay, next paragraph. To emphasize your point, and then expose the enemy. You then expose the enemy. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise is a simple yet effective way of enlisting the audience in a you against the world mindset. Okay, that's a marketing tactic, and like marketing, like you want to sell your courses, you're going to use marketing tactics. And who was it? Like 37 Signals talked about how your product needs an enemy. Like their enemy, what was it at the time? I don't remember. Like they were making Basecamp, some like corporate project management software maybe. Like Rails's enemy maybe was like Java server pages or something like that. And like, but it's like a way of distinguishing, like showing what your product or service has that isn't available in some other form, like isn't available in the market leading competitor. Like I think that's a marketing tactic that involves the enemy. Like it, but I don't know. I guess it does get people in a sort of us versus them mindset. So maybe it's not necessarily good in that sense. I don't know. What do you think? Gatekeepers is also a good word to use, as the discourse around privilege and people keeping things away from the audience is catchy. They are keeping you down. They are unjust. They are lying to you about difficulty. They are making you do the hard, boring work. This is a technique that applies to more than just programming. It's a simple technique for manipulating mobs. As long as there are enemies, there's an easy thing to rally the audience against them. True. But regardless of this technique, the main point, well, okay. Yeah, this is something to watch out for, in not just in programming and blogs about programming and other media about it and this kind of thing. Like, watch out for people trying to turn you against some other group of people, or like, pointing out all the things wrong with this group of people. Moving on, but regardless of this technique, the main point is to be vague in the content of your communication so that it's complicated to refute that communication. Okay, this is kind of the Gish-Gallop logical fallacy, or rhetorical fallacy, I think maybe a better word for it. Like you give sort of vague but wrong statements, and your opponent has to, like, from an audience standpoint, your opponent has to refute all of them before actually, contending with the flaws of an actual argument or presenting their own argument. the sort of pithy way of stating that is it takes an order of magnitude more effort to refute BS than it does to spew it. Anyway, let's look at my examples. Programming is easy. Took me so far 1,385 words, and it's not done yet. HTML is a programming language. It's somewhat more complicated because of the shifting meaning of programming. The pure technical truth about HTML is that it's not programming in the real sense. I don't know, maybe there are aspects to HTML that are programming in the real sense, but I mean, it's grown as a language, so maybe there's more to it now. But it's a markup presentation language. I mean, it's an important language that you need to know as part of web development. Incomplete description of how web pages look like and what it contains. HTML is a necessary tool in any web-related project, and it's not where you do the programming. Okay, I think this is kind of a digression from the programming is easy and gatekeeping question. But if someone tells you about that HTML is a programming language, their defense is usually about you gatekeeping the meaning of programming, but they are rarely interested in diving into the real meaning of their own words. As I said, programming is a label, and like any glory labels, this one makes people, especially the incompetent, who are the incompetent, act very defensively. See my own defense here. The illusion of, like, what makes someone incompetent and why, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that fields shouldn't have standards. And in software development as a professional field, like, there's like a lack of well-defined standards beyond like bad standards, like you have to have this degree. But what makes someone incompetent? Like, that's not really addressed here, I don't think. The illusion of I can do what you do. Now, the trickier example is the programming is all about mastering Google/Stack Overflow searching, because that is true and wrong at the same time. Mastering searching, I kind of agree with that. Mastering searching the web is a very important skill of a modern developer, right? You got to find the docs. You've got to find, if someone already knows how to solve your problem, it's going to save you lots of time. Or if somebody has written the docs for what you're working on, it's going to save you a lot of time to be able to find that via Google or pick your favorite search engine. I come from a world where this was not the case, where Google did not exist, and instead one had to look through documentation and read sometimes hundreds of pages to get an answer on how something should behave, if the documentation existed. If not, there was the only solution of trying, failing, and trying again. You kids don't know how easy you had it. When I was your age, we had to walk uphill both ways in the snow, barefoot. I don't know. Am I being unfair? Now, however, there is no try in a very Yoda-esque change of circumstances. What? I'm not sure what that means. There are full toolkits, libraries, or programming languages. Maybe that like you've got like intro level tools that make it harder to fail. I don't know. And programming languages in commercial offerings that rely strictly on you searching the answer for their problem. The documentation is not meant for users to read, it's for search engines to index. And okay, I mean, you search with a search engine to find the documentation, and then you read the documentation, but you don't have to read the whole. You don't have to RTFM, read the fine manual, um, like from cover to cover nowadays for most tools. Maybe that would be maybe for some things it would be helpful to have a manual that you're intended to read cover to cover. I don't know. Um, Probably depends on the tool and the like level of like if you're going to be using a tool, day in day out, you probably want some training on that tool, whether self-administered or otherwise. So, reading a manual on it might be helpful, or gaining that training in some other way. I don't think it's a problem that like documentation is meant to be accessed by searching. Like that's in most cases that's how we access information these days. Like nothing wrong with that. I mean, unless this is something that needs to work in the event of a solar flare or, in an underground bunker with no access to the internet. And I don't know. I mean, there's probably some cases where it would help to, have that kind of backup system where you have a nice manual with an index of, this information is on what page. Like in the case of an internet outage or something like that. Like there's probably a lot of instances where that kind of thing is useful, but in the majority of cases, like you have access to the internet, at least here in the Western world, I guess. I don't want to like, there are areas of the world with probably less internet access than what I take for granted. Anywho, most users rely heavily on most current day tools rely on Stack Overflow. Yeah, I mean that's kind of a problem because like Stack Overflow is a third-party site that like if you're developing a tool, like you don't have any necessarily control over what's going to be on Stack Overflow. I mean, you can answer questions yourself, but I mean, right? Kind of it probably is better to have like some documentation that like gives a base theory of what your tool does, how it works, what its model of the world is. Continuing, in fact, the public's reliance on Stack Overflow is probably the scariest thing that happened to the programming community in the past 10 years. Stack Overflow is a huge crutch that stops you from walking on your own. Or are they stilts with springy things that help you walk farther on your own? I mean, on your own, what is on your own? Obviously, if you're relying on the internet, but it's not like you're developing, like you're not in most cases you're not developing your compiler from scratch either. So are you really, if you even though you're reading the manual for whatever compiler you're using or whatever interpreter you're using or language, like are you still walking on your own? Like I think that's I don't know. I think that's a little unfair. I mean, one problem though is that Stack Overflow it's a private for-profit company. It's its existence depends on a business model of, well, I believe they sell advertising. They they have a job board, and so if your tool is supportive of that, if questions about your tool are supportive of that business model, it's probably going to be a very good solution for you. Um, if not, if it's like somehow hostile to that business model, or the business model would be hostile to you, to your particular programming niche, maybe that'd be maybe Stack Overflow is bad for you. But I mean, I get you've still got the web to put your documentation up on. You can still publish your manual in Lulu or whatever it is that I think it's Lulu. You can like publish books, self-publish, and then people can print them on demand and have them shipped. I don't think that makes people stop thinking for themselves either. I mean, you're still going to have to do work to integrate the copy-pasted code from Stack Overflow into your your program that you're writing. I mean, it is possible to do this like boneheadedly and copy paste, and then you get an error and not know why it's happening, and I don't know, maybe not take responsibility for fixing your own problems. Um, but I don't think Stack Overflow prevents people from thinking for themselves or learning how to code for themselves. I think it's just a tool that people use, and it's useful for a lot of things. Like um, I think that documentation for a given tool existing only on Stack Overflow would be kind of a red flag. And that is something I've seen in like Python. I use a lot, and there's some issues. I only see things about on. I only find information on Stack Overflow for a few things. And so I don't know. Maybe there should be like norms of updating the documentation for things like that. I mean, these things like Python is it's built by volunteers for the most part. I think that there are some like there are some people paid on the like in the employ of the Python Software Foundation, but it's an open source project, so its existence depends on volunteer labor, which is probably another can of worms. But maybe there would be a benefit of um, like a norm of creating the social norm of updating the documentation either instead of or in addition to answering that question on Stack Overflow. Maybe there would be a benefit to that. All right. Um, but mastering searching Google and Stack Overflow is a must. I, for one, find myself often searching for very basic things like how to write a for loop and insert language here. True. But that's not because I don't know how to write a for loop, but because I'm switching between many languages in a very short time frame. I'm looking for the best option, even if I'm not switching between languages personally, like I just, if I just forget the syntax, like that happens. Brains sometimes decide to take a break. because I'm switching languages in a short time frame, and I'm looking for the best option to iterate through a collection, not always a for loop, mind you, or the proper syntax, which each language changes only slightly, making things confusing. So while a beginner might say, sure, not even an experienced developer can remember all these things, the reasons why I look for the same things that a beginner looks for are quite different. Okay. So yeah, there's more to programming than searching on Stack Overflow and copy pasting. Like, I mean, obviously someone has to write the answers, right? But also, there is a skill of writing a program and learning a programming language. I don't think anyone anyone's really saying that Stack Overflow is the only thing to it. Like, so this might be a bit of a straw man. Is like the programming is easy. Like, I don't think anyone's really saying that the only thing to programming is copy pasting from Stack Overflow. But maybe I'm strawmanning this article a little bit. In that case, if as a beginner you look at what experienced developers do, it looks easy. It looks like anyone can do what they do. It looks unimpressive. There's a myth of the super programmers that do things in a different way. Hollywood paints them as hyper-fast typists breaking the speed of light because the only way to easily portray how good a character is at something is to make them look faster than any human could possibly be. As an aside, Hollywood would portray the best person to count 10 seconds as a person who finishes in 5. The point is that it looks easy, but it isn't. Right. Programming is not just typing. Like, I think that's something that even managers of software developers can sometimes struggle to understand. Heck, probably even professional programmers get it wrong. Like, you forget that the amount of thought that has to go into something. And you sort of think about how many lines of code would it be versus what are the unknowns in the problem domain, and what's the level of complexity. The point is that it looks easy but isn't, because what is missing on the beginner side is the experience, the perspective over things, the focus on the real important things. For a beginner, the syntax of a loop is the main obstacle in achieving the ability to count to 10. For an experienced developer, the syntax is the thing that slows them from applying an operation to a collection of filtered data. Right? So yeah, things can look easy. It's like the person who fixes your, I don't know, your appliance, and they kick it and charge you $1,000, and the bill says $1 $1 kicking it and $999 knowing where to kick it. It can take time to learn learn those hidden aspects of a field that are not necessarily visible to beginners, or in some cases can even be overlooked by professionals. Programming is easy, holds people down. The reason this post exists is the following tweet. This article written in Romanian, but I'll focus on the English source. I understand the intent of this post, the tweet says, and no, it's not malicious. However, learning to code is difficult, and this anyone can code. Coding isn't hard. Dialogue made me feel dumb as hell when I was new. Yeah, that's Like, that's a big thing. Like, nothing is so frustrating as the thing that's supposed to be easy. Like, this is something that I ran into, like, even knowing how to code and having worked with other frameworks. Like, for some reason, the idea that Rails is supposed to be easy makes it hard for me. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Maybe I just need more time with it. But, like, I don't know. I don't currently have a need to spend more time with it because, well, unless I wanted to work as a Rails programmer, which I wouldn't necessarily mind, but I tend to focus on Python stuff. Okay, so here's the quoted tweet. Coding is not difficult. Literally Googling and fixing bugs we caused in the first place. Anyone can code. Yeah, anybody can get started learning coding. And I would like to think, like, this is my, like, sort of optimistic view of things, is, like, I think that with the right teachers or the right materials, resources, whatever you call them, like, anyone can learn anything. Like, if they're willing to put in the time to do it, to learn it. And I think one thing that, I don't know how much this article says it explicitly, but there is a bit of a subtext to it, that the, like, getting started, you can find beginner articles and things that, like, teach you the syntax of a programming language, but going from that, like, there isn't necessarily a clear path between that and being able to build applications and being able to do this on a professional level. Like, I mean, that information is out there, don't get me wrong. It's in lots of places, but there's also, like what's false paths? Is there a detours? Like, there's BS out there that can lead you astray in terms of your learning journey, in terms of becoming, like, capable of developing applications and capable of working as a programmer and advancing in that field. So, right. So I think when you get to a certain level, and then you see this rhetoric of programming is easy, like, it can make you feel bad about yourself because it's not coming, like, what you're trying to do isn't coming easy to you. And so maybe that is, like, the core thing that is, like, driving this article, or, well, at least driving the tweet that inspired the article. People feel dumb when they have to trace back on their own creation and fix it, improve it, make it work against real-world scenarios that sometimes you didn't envision when first writing your code. Positivity doesn't help you when you actually need help. Doesn't it? I mean, okay, having an optimistic outlook might lead you to seek help rather than giving up, I suppose. The only thing it can do is offer you courage. But what do you do with unsubstantiated courage? You go into upper management. That's what. I'm kidding. Any upper managers that are out there? How fast will the positivity and unsubstantiated claims will succumb to the grim realities of the programming job? Yeah, I mean, and I think that's probably true of any, like, undertaking. Like, positive thinking will only get you so far. Like, I mean, it's healthy to try and maintain optimism, I think. I mean, that's kind of another can of worms, but like optimism, or at least avoiding like spiraling pessimism, um, are useful in like moving through life. Okay. The original poster that this tweet was a response to said something along the lines of people think I'm smart because I'm a programmer. It's about Googling and fixing your own bugs. But it's really about that and this exaggerated, limited view. But programming is not really about that, and this exaggerated, limiting view tells me that her experience in software development is quite reduced. Her. Okay, Cat McGee. The scary part, she is building a site called thecodinginterview.com, making her a top source for advice for beginners. And don't get me started how immoral this coding interview racket is. Well, I don't know. If she can help you perform better in interviews, like, I mean, coding interviews don't necessarily correlate with your performance, your ability to be a good programmer employee. But given that fact, I mean, well, for one thing, like that is something that we as a profession should work on, is improving like the ability of interviews to like assess incoming talent and not put them through useless puzzles and things like that. But I don't think it's immoral to help people improve their chances in coding interviews. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, I mean, and I don't think that this person did he say like she's okay. Well, he's assuming her inexperience based on like this kind of offhand tweet, and that is Kat McGee really saying that like it's literally googling and fixing bugs? Like the I don't think that like she's, I mean, the overt text of her tweet is that, right? But like I don't think anyone is trying to, like, that's kind of hyperbole. Like that is it's a rhetorical device that exists in human language. So it's hyperbole to say that it's just googling your bugs and copy pasting from Stack Overflow, right? It's an exaggeration. But I don't think anyone really thinks that there isn't like a skill to learning to code. Like there aren't levels of um, levels of difficulty, of complexity that you're going to run into as you progress. But I mean, if people are taking this literally, as this tweet seems to indicate, I don't know. Maybe people are taking that too literally, and I don't know. I probably have as well at times, and like thinking this is supposed to be easy, uh, and then when it's not actually easy, it's becomes more frustrating. So Positivity is infallible because positivity was never put to the test, and it's completely absent when the shit really hits the fan. The mistakes are all yours because anyone can code, and coding isn't hard. Right. So yeah, maybe it does help. Like siding with this article in this case, it does help to reinforce that there are a lot of aspects of programming, like a lot of, you're going to hit roadblocks, you're going to possibly fail at projects, you are going to need help in some cases. In some cases, there may not be help available, and you've got to figure it out on your own. So I think that's something to be like realistic about to people who are considering getting into the field, in whatever capacity, be that as a hobby or as a profession or as like as learning in the guise of learning about your world, learning skills that are useful for everyone. I think I kind of already went over this at the beginning of the stream, and yeah, so maybe I'm about to repeat myself a little bit, but I do think that there should be some programming taught in, like, starting with primary school or grade school, whatever we're calling it now. The first kind of school that, like, maybe not preschool. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not a school teacher, but yeah, I think we should learn programming just like we learn arithmetic, because our world increasingly runs on computers. So if I was going to write an article, which I'm probably not, that might be the thesis. Programming is hard, doesn't have to be scary. Did I skip any of this? Mistakes are all yours because... Yeah, okay. Because it doesn't have to be scary. Some people insist that lying to beginners about how hard programming really is would scare them. I'm not sure when the fact that something is hard stopped people really interested in pursuing something. After all, most of our popular culture is about some heroes doing the hard thing. I feel that this is part of the same culture that coddles the minds of people, making anything that is not immediate not worth the effort. But when I started programming, nobody told me that programming is easy. Instead, my expectation was that it's hard. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, like, not all programming has to be hard. Like, I think that, like, there should be an effort to make beginner resources easy. Or hell, like, advanced resources, like training materials, documentation, like an effort to make them as easy as possible, because people are busy. Like, they don't have, like, ideally they wouldn't spend their time beating their head against your programming language or a tool that you provide. So, but yeah, there are going to be roadblocks, and we shouldn't hide that fact from potential programmers. I know that there's an obsession with overachieving, with mastering programming, with being a senior at 22. I refrain from pursuing such fool's errands. Instead, this word senior, I don't know. I've never had senior in my job title. As of my last job, I had worked 11 years in the field, been a lead developer, but never had senior in my title. So, like, I don't know. I can't really tell you what senior means then. Instead, so I don't know why I just digressed for a minute on that. Maybe we'll come back to it in the future. Getting back to it, instead, I knew that programming was hard and achieving what I want might be impossible. In a sense, it is. I learned programming so I can write my own games, and I haven't done that more than a quarter of a century later, but that gave me clarity about the scope of my undertaking. What I'm saying should not discourage beginners. It should just prepare them for what's ahead. So if you want to tell a beginner something like this, when it comes to programming, some things are easy and some things are hard. If you're patient enough in the time, the hard things will be exciting and the easy things will become harder. But don't tell them that programming is easy. It's not. Okay, I don't know. Maybe that's a good sentence to introduce. The easy things will become harder? That doesn't sound very encouraging. I mean, unless you're like sort of giving a little more nuance than that, like you'll find more detail to the easy things and well, I don't know. Don't tell them that easy things will become harder. That's not going to sell them on it. So this is another like thing, like possible rabbit hole in over here. Like people, like some people learn programming to write your own games, like, and some people do it to, I don't know, make web pages. What are people nowadays usually getting into programming for? Like, what's their goal? Like, what's your goal if you're watching this? Like, I'd kind of like to know, like, what's getting you into programming? Like, is it? I mean, nothing wrong if it's like you want a good job that, right, like that's better for you in whatever respect, that pays better, that's less of a physically demanding task, or whatever you want out of a job. Like there's nothing wrong with wanting to get into it because it's a job. I know a lot of people get into it because of games, or at least they have. So what are people getting, like what's the selling point? Like for me, I don't know. I think I kind of wanted, like, I didn't know this word at the time, but the original, like the thing that made me say I kind of want to learn some more programming stuff after, like, my dad sort of introduced me. Like I think what I was interested was games, like when I was 6 or something. And I mean, but I also found it interesting learning that this code is how the computer works, that I was interacting with in order to play games. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I remember it too well, like how my introduction to computers went at that point. But I think like you'd probably call it the demo scene now. Um, like I didn't know about the demo scene at that point, and I have never actually gotten into the demo scene. But I think that's like I kind of wanted to make this like animation thing, and I think that's what like got me to say like I kind of want to learn more about programming. And this was like early days of the internet at that point. I mean, well, not the internet itself, but like I didn't like pre-Google, like someone got me a book when I asked them for it. And then like I, picked software engineering, or well, computer science technically, as a degree, like entirely for like career related reasons, like it was something, I mean, it was something that I had been interested in, and something that would be hopefully, a good good career to have. Um, so so yeah, nothing wrong with whatever your entry point is into the field. And to bring it back to this article, like it's hopefully that all the resources are out there, that getting into it is easy and accessible in all senses of the word. But yeah, some things will be hard, and we shouldn't sugarcoat that fact. But hopefully there are, also people willing to help others through that. Answering your questions, mentoring, what have you, um, as until you're able to like program on your own and get through those problems on your own. Um, like nobody is born knowing how to walk. Nobody's born knowing how to program, how to code, or how to build applications, or whatever your subfield of programming is. And I don't think we talked much about like programming as part of other professions, but like it's like software engineers aren't the only programmers these days. Like nowadays, well, I won't say every, but a lot of scientists, like a lot of science is like programming essentially. Like you're dealing with a lot of data, and what are you going to use to process that data? Code that in most cases you write. Um, but yeah, we shouldn't sugarcoat the fact that it's not always going to be easy, and hopefully, like there's help available when you need it. And uh, if you're getting into this field, good luck. If I can help in any way, if you have questions for me, uh, software engineer has 11 years experience. Hit me up. I'll help if I can. I don't know if I'll necessarily know the answer to your question, but maybe I'll, like, it can't hurt to ask. In any case, I hope you have enjoyed or found this entertaining, educational, or whatever you're looking for. So have a good evening or whatever time it is where you are, and until next time, so long, fellow aliens.